Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today is Chris Rossini, our co-host. Chris, welcome to the program.
It's great to be with you, Dr. Paul.
Good. We'd like to talk today about an economic matter, and that's what we do frequently on Friday. But in particular, I want to visit with you on the subject of the complaining that goes on about there's too many wealthy people, and the wealthy are getting more numerous and the poor are getting more numerous. So, and what's going on here? I use those terms myself at times because that is what's happening. But what I'm concerned about is how angry people are getting, because it seems like there's so much distortion on where the wealth goes. And we have said and we believe that the freer the market and the freer the people are, the better the distribution of wealth is, the larger the middle class is. And that isn't what's happening right now. It's almost the opposite. There is one number I want to use. There are dozens of numbers. All you have to do is read the media and they'll tell you about who owns the wealth and how much they have compared to the 1% and the 5% compared to how many others. But there's a statistic out that I think is interesting, because it is said that there are 8 people that own as much wealth as 1/2 of the world population. That, of course, would be the bottom half, and a lot of people in the bottom half have nothing. But there's 8 people in the world that are so wealthy that it's equal to. So they should say, well, boy, that free enterprise is a terrible, terrible system. And that's what I am working hard at, is trying to refute, because I don't believe that's true at all, because we don't have capitalism in the true sense of the word. We don't have free markets. We don't have sound money. We don't have a non-intervention economic system. We have the Federal Reserve. All that nonsense. And I think more and more now people are narrowing that down to describe what we have. And I like to use the word because it does describe it, and that's corporatism. You know, people worry about the corporations. I complain, and we've complained on this program, of the amount of power that the social media has, and how they're exempt from lawsuits, and how they benefit tremendously from the government. And that goes on and on. The military-industrial complex is another. The drug industry. This is corporatism that is out in the open, but basically it's very ingrained in our system. For instance, I am convinced, especially because it's been stated clearly, the purpose of the Federal Reserve, especially since 1987, the purpose of the Federal Reserve is to prop up the stock market, never allow it to crash. And of course, back then they said, well, they can't do that because eventually the market's going to demand higher interest rates. And you know, occasionally in the last year or so, the market's trying to push interest rates up. But the authorities are so powerful that they've been able to rig these interest rates to help prop up the stock market. So that is the corporatism that I want to visit with you today on Chris, because I think it's very, very negative. And the biggest negative is that because it's causing anger, and the anger is directed toward not corporatism, but toward free market economics and Austrian economics and liberty. And that is a real challenge, but I think there's a lot that hangs in the balance on that understanding of what that really means.
Right, Dr. Paul. And it's important to point out and understand that wealth inequality by itself is normal, natural. We want wealth inequality. In fact, it would be a very scary world if there wasn't any, because we're not carbon copy robots that are lifeless. We are conscious. We're all unique. So to think that there should be no wealth inequality is actually, we've seen the results of civilizations where they tried to do that, and it's beyond scary. So the problem is not the amount of wealth that someone has, whether you're a millionaire, a billionaire, or the number, whether you have 1 billion or 100 billion. Who cares? The thing is, how do you get that money? Is it at the service of others, or is it at the expense of others? And what Dr. Paul is talking about, the corporatism, it is at the expense of others. It is politically connected wealth. So when you have that kind of discrepancy, now people are going to care. They're going to notice, because they're paying for it. Their standard of living is going down, while these billionaires are getting richer and richer off of their backs. And Dr. Paul mentioned the medical complex. think of these injections that they're pushing like never before have we seen anything like this. Does the government make vaccines? No, the corporations make the vaccines. That's the problem. The government and corporation partnership. That is what needs to be separated in order to remedy this situation.
You know, the real problem I see with this is it's real and it does distort wealth, but it makes people very, very angry because they think it's unfair. And it is unfair if you have a system of government that is really designed to help a few people. But the very nature of fiat money, even if people worked at trying to be fairer at the distribution, of course, that's what they try to do. The system does serve the banks and the big corporations that borrow the money, and they have access to it when it's worth more than when the little people get it, because that's when they have to pay higher prices for their food and product. So this has been going on now, but and it is something that is serious because people now are very, very angry, and of course, right now it's connected with the lockdown, the COVID pandemic that was concocted. Who was behind that? A few corporations, I believe, had a lot at stake at what happened this past year. But that did a lot of harm to the economy. And some of these people who are using this as an excuse to move in the direction of more government, actually, they're not even embarrassed by talking about Marxism. They really believe in socialism and Marxism, and that's what they want. So they use this as an excuse, and I don't think we, as libertarians and conservatives and people who do believe in the free market system, I don't think we do a very good job in defending ourselves and saying, hey, look, it's not we who have caused this. It's the people who use government. It's the government is at fault, and here you want more government. And I think it's pretty clear to so many of us that, too much government, too much printed money, and too much of this corporate welfareism, gives you places like Venezuela. And yet we among ourselves seem to win that argument. But no, it isn't very, very clear. There should be no serious effort for the radical socialists and the Marxists to have positions in Congress now, and yet that is happening. Why couldn't they just look at the 20th century? It's estimated that probably over 200 million people were killed because of the authoritarianism that existed, with all the wars that went on, and people are careless. And it is the temptation, though. People get tempted, and the government comes in, the politicians say, I'm going to do this for you and this for you, and the people say, well, that's a better deal. That's what government should be doing. They should be helping us out. And they don't understand what freedom is all about, what the responsibilities are. They might say, well, I'll take the benefits, but I'm not going to be responsible if I get sick. That attitude. So they expect to help the support from the government, but it is a system that breeds what I call this corporatism, and it's a combination. It existed, and it was well known that big corporations, even American corporations, put money into Hitler's movement when it was forming. And there's many right now today, and it baffles a lot of people about why is big business, in social media and elsewhere, why are they so supportive of lockdown? You would think this would be bad because they happen to believe in that, but they believe also in the combination, the collusion and the partnership with government. And that is where the harm is done. And people have to have a clear understanding what liberty is. Liberty means you assume responsibility for yourself, but you also have the opportunity of using your liberty as long as you don't hurt people any way you want, and you also have a right to keep what you earn. And all of a sudden, history comes along and says, you know what? When you have a freer system, there's a much larger middle class, and there's much more wealth that is better distributed, and you don't have 8 people that have the equivalent of the wealth of half of the population of the world. There's something wrong with that, and that is not a source of, it doesn't come from having too much freedom, and that's what they work on. We have to cut down the government size in order to get back to a fairer system.
Right. Too much freedom is definitely not a problem that we have today. The next thing I wanted to talk about, Dr. Paul, is a word that we often hear, and it's the word orderly. And it's ironic because the kings of creating disorder in our world are always preaching how they want an orderly decline in the dollar, orderly inflation. They're going to go 6,000 miles away to create order in some other nation. You know, they think that they can control and micromanage life, and they're wrong every single time. And the reason why they use that word orderly is because they want you to get used to each step down in your standard of living. You know, they'll deny every step down. It's never been better all the time. You know, just today, we could think about all the freedoms that existed just 20 years ago, and they're gone. All the purchasing power that is gone. All the trillions of dollars that have been wasted on wars. But, you know, they want to always tell you that it's never been better, and they want to seem like they're in control of all this. They are not in control. The market, human interactions, human choices are always far bigger and far more powerful than interventionists. And no matter how much central planners think that they know, what they don't know is always greater. So central planning always fails. We're living through it. We're watching the failure with our eyes, and we have to know which way to go, and we preach liberty.
Very good. You know, that word orderly is something that I found fascinating when I was in Congress and listening to the chairman of the Federal Reserve boards. Several of them would use the same word. Because if I would bring up an objection to what was going on, Congress spending too much money and Federal Reserve accommodating and monetizing debt and also taking care of the banks, all that thing. And I says it's going to lead to a problem, and look, there are recessions and all this. And the answer several times from the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board used the word orderly. Yeah, and they didn't say, Ron, you're completely wrong. It doesn't happen. We know how to do this. They said, it's as long as it's orderly, it's okay. And that's their excuse. And you pointed out very well, Chris, that's what they want. As long as it's smoothed out, the harm can come gradually, I suppose. But they want to postpone the paying of their extravagance. And they are pretty sophisticated on this, because I think we're in this postponement of paying the bills longer than we have ever been, and in a bigger fashion than ever in these past 10 years of the monetizing of debt, the QE, what we did during the lockdown and the money spent, and the continuation of the spending, Republican or Democrat, in the militarism that we're involved in around the world. So it gets postponed, but you can't eliminate it. The debt, though, will be eliminated, and the extravagance will be, corrected. And there's not many ways you can do that. You can eliminate this obligation by everybody working harder. That's what individuals and sometimes corporations have to do. They work harder and pay their bills. And they have to rearrange and do a better job or get another job, whatever. But in government, that's not going to happen, because if there's any attempt for a political correction that you try to get your house in order, you'd have to cut down on spending, and nobody's for that. Those bills always get passed. No matter how much arguing and fighting between the two parties, they always get the big bills passed, even though they grandstand and try to excite their base and say, look, we're going to do this and that, and we can do this. But they want to postpone it. Now, what they can do, since it won't be paid down, when they first discovered they were way over spending, they will borrow. We have good credit, and we were and theoretically still have the reserve currency of the world, so we can borrow. Less so than it was a few years ago, and it's going to get a lot worse than it is now, that we can borrow that and postpone it, and it'll have to be paid later on. Well, there'll be a limit to that, even though right now we haven't reached it, but we're starting to, because the next step is what happens is you pay for it by allowing the currency to pay back the bills with a devalued currency, and that's a deliberate policy. It was theoretically even though it was very mild. That's what the Federal Reserve have been arguing for more than a decade. Oh, if we can only get it in prices going up at a rate of 2%, everything will be okay, and that'll be good for the economy and all that nonsense. And but 2% now is already, some people say it's 6, some people say it could be more, and some people like myself say it's going to get a lot worse because they're not going to cut the printing presses, because they've tried it a couple times, and that's a big thing going on now in Washington between Treasury and Federal Reserve and the politicians, is when are you going to start to back off on this and start reducing the size of the balance sheet? Well, when the last time they tried it a couple years ago, it was a disaster, and they had to emergency way go back to QE again. And they're doing $120 billion a month routinely. And they're claiming this is orderly. And in a sense it is, because people, not only do the big guys get all their money and they have big bucks, the other people who have been out of work, they're getting big bonuses, welfare checks. And some of them don't even want to go back to work. It's such a good deal. But that's limited. It may seem orderly, but we already see some breaking down, because I believe it can lead to a revolution, because the far left and the Soviet type of communism can excite people and get their anger up. And just look at our streets now, more violence than I think we've had in a long, long time. And that is not going to go away in an orderly fashion, because we don't have the support from the politicians, the bureaucrats, the professors, or the people to do what we have to do. So I think it's pretty important for all of us to do two things. One, try to spread the message of sound money and sound economic policy, and also prepare for times which will be very difficult to get by on.
Very good, Dr. Paul. I will finish up highlighting 3 words that anybody who has known Dr. Paul through the decades, especially from his presidential runs, you'll recognize these 3 words. It's called empire of lies. And sadly, that is what we're living in. We hear about companies, they create virtual reality goggles or glasses or whatever. We don't need them. We don't need anything to show us a virtual reality. All we have to do is look at Washington, the media, social media, Hollywood, you name it, it's everywhere. And it's lies. It's a virtual reality of lies, whether you're talking about the economy that has been decimated by government action. We're watching our standard of living drop. Even though you're getting infusions of cash, they're destroying the dollar. We're buying less with the money that we have. And they try to point, oh, look at the Dow, look at the Dow. Who cares about the Dow? We're buying less with our money. That's what we care about, our day-to-day lives. And if you think about all the wars, 100 years of wars, and all the lies that were involved with them, the invasions, the most recent ones, were wrong, but they were sold to us as being, oh, it'll take weeks, months. Well, Afghanistan and Iraq are 20 years. For 20 years, they've been taking trillions and trillions of dollars out of our pockets for nothing. And then we have the COVID lies, which I'm happy to see that many, many, many people have seen through them. They started with 15 days, and now they are trying to inject the entire population for a virus with a 99.7% survival rate. So they are forcing people not to trust them, not to trust anything. And what we say is you have to verify first. And this is hard for people because naturally, we're not authoritarians, the vast majority of us, and we'll trust the doctor in the white coat or the expert. But that politics has destroyed that trust. So you have to, on your own, get the information, make the best decisions that you can, because you're going to get the consequences of those decisions that only you're going to feel. So you have to make the best choices that you can. We hope to provide help in helping to see the truth in the best that we can.
Very, very good, Chris. So many things that are going on today, the policies that we're getting, either monetary or financial, and all the intrusions into our personal lives and our civil liberties. You say, why are they doing it? Are they really stupid? Well, there's a few of those up there, let me tell you. I've met a couple. But I think it's more serious than that. because I think what they're doing is they actually want those bad results, these really very dumb results. I've already mentioned, some of the things that they have done in the history. It gives us pretty good evidence of how ridiculous authoritarianism is, and yet we still go ahead and do it. For instance, right now, if you're in San Francisco and you're homeless, they have a program. They'll get you a tent and put the tent up for you. And there's a bunch of them now, hundreds. And I think it's into the billions of dollars that they've already spent on tents. And they have to take that money from somebody that still has a job, so they steal that money and buy tents. But the astounding thing is that a single tent, by the time they buy it, put it up, and take care of it, and provide some utilities for it, it's $60,000. And then somebody found a figure where I think there's a small apartments that you can get in San Francisco, at around the $50,000 range. So they're spending more money for living on tents, and it's a sacred thing now. You could never just go out there and say, hey, no, this is a bad deal. This doesn't make any sense. We have to tear all the tents down. But anyway, they get sucked into this, and then they go along with it. But right now, I think we're in a period of time that a lot of people refer to this as stagflation. The economy is weakening. They're recognizing that, and prices are starting to go up. Reminds me a little bit about how bad it got in the 1970s, and it could get a lot worse. But the government's position, they wanted the inflation because they equate, not only do they equate a way of paying off debt, but they also equate that prices going up is a sign of a healthy economy. If you have inflation, it's a healthy economy. But what if the prices go up and the people have less purchasing power and they all get poorer? They never ask that. Inflation is good because it's a sign of a healthy economy, and there are more jobs, and it's due to a booming economy, which is absolutely false. It could be because if you have a sound economic system, sound money, and free markets, prices will probably go down, and the standard of living will go up. But people are terrified of that. They think, prices going down, that's depression. That means there's a recession going on. So they like it. People do have a better understanding of the supply and demand of the products that we buy. But one thing that a lot of people never get taught, and they don't get it. They get it only if they study more in Austrian economics. Is you have to deal with the supply and demand of the dollar, the money, the monetary unit, because there's more than just supply and demand of the corn that you might be buying. There's the supply and demand of the dollar, because that affects the pricing mechanism. And then since there's a misunderstanding of that, they don't deal with the problem, and this is deliberate. They don't deal with the problem that is spending and monetizing debt. So they'll say, well, we'll put on wage and price controls. We'll control the prices because it's the prices. They're out of control. But if and I believe we're in a stage of what we call stagflation, because we have prices going up and the economy is weakening. But if that advances, which I believe it will advance, you have inflationary depressions. Most people think, oh no, you only have depressions and weak economy when you have deflation. Well, just go to Venezuela, you'll find out that they've inflated like crazy. They have a lot of monetary units, but they're still having problems. So there's a big difference, and this is what I think will happen. The inflation is going to get a lot worse. The economy will get weaker, and then we have a more likelihood we will have an inflationary depression rather than a deflationary depression. But the final decider on this is usually the marketplace. They make a lot of the decisions. Even as much as they rig the price of gold and all these other things, ultimately the market will tell you what it's worth. And ultimately the market is going to tell us exactly what the purchasing power of the US dollar is. And right now most people are thinking it's not worth as much this year as it was last year. So We want to continue this effort to explain to as many people as possible to understand why free markets is what we champion, because it is aligned with personal liberty. And if you're looking for a philosophy that you can get excited by and have a moral defense of it, then you can expect that there's much better chances of achieving peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.